Last week, I took a trip down to the State Fair of Texas and decided it was about time to change my usual routine and visit one of Dallas's most prominent museums, known as the African American Museum. The African American Museum has become one of the most successful museums in promoting and preserving African American history and culture in the United States. The museum showcases African American fine art, traditional African art, and historical artifacts dating back to the 1800s. Its second floor contains one of its most educational and fascinating exhibits, facing the rising sun Freedman Cemetery. Most of its information can be found at the museum. However, its true location is located in the city of Dallas on the intersection of Lemon Avenue and Central Expressway. A Texas red granite archway marks the entrance to the memorial. Located on either side of the arch are two life-size bronze statues. The statue on the left of the entrance is named Sentinel, or warrior. He is dressed in clothes inspired by the Benin culture of West Africa. He holds a large ceremonial machete with its blade pointed to the ground. His female counterpart on the right, the prophetess, holds a small harp to her chest with her left hand. She is symbolic of an African oral historian, keeping the knowledge and memory of her ancestors alive. On its other side of the arch within the memorial garden are another two bronze figures. The female figure on the left, the violated soul, whose wrists and feet are bound by iron manacles, covers her face with her hands. She is symbolic of the violation of African women and the degrading nature of slavery. Covered faces represent the loss of personal identity experienced by enslaved persons. Her male counterpart on the right, the struggling soul, is similarly shown with his wrists and feet bound by iron manacles. He covers his own scream with his bent left arm. He is symbolic of the enslaved Africans' resistance to slavery and their constant struggle for freedom. The watery background represents the Atlantic Middle Passage unique to the American slave trade. Above each of the life-size bronze figures, in the top register of the arch, are 12 smaller bronze sculptures, suggestive of West African wood sculptures. At the center of the memorial park, Dream of Freedom sits atop a Texas red granite circular plinth. The sculpture is symbolic of a newly emancipated couple contemplating the death and suffering of their ancestors. The male figure, whose shirtless torso is scarred by whip marks on his back, wraps his left arm around a kneeling woman. Freedman Cemetery was established as a burial ground for early African Americans who settled down in the North Dallas area in 1861. This area of Dallas County was settled by former African American slaves shortly after the American Civil War and was a cultural, social, and economic center of Black life. The emancipation brought enormous hope. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. Slaves in Dallas who came as early as the 1840s were forced, along with the many million of others in America, to create a new world of their own in a place that exploited them. The number of African slaves in Dallas was relatively small, growing from 207 in 1850 to 1,074 in 1860. Their presence as free labor was nonetheless vital for economic growth. As ruined as the Black family was under slavery, the values of family life survived. And perhaps because of its proximity to the already established burying ground, families gathered near each other for safety, mutual support, and assistance. This North Dallas area provided a new place for work, family, and community. This segregated community flourished. However, despite the advances it made, laws and other city ordinances were implemented to restrict the presence of social activities of African Americans. They were plagued by the one thing they could not change: racism. During this period, they were subjected to acts of violence by their white neighbors. Hundreds of men and women were beaten, whipped, hanged, and shot. Lynching, segregated public facilities, unfair housing, and underemployment disregarded the humanity of African American men, women, and children. Even before slavery ended, Black people in America understood that education was the ultimate emancipator. They knew that in order to obtain and sustain freedom, education was fundamental. Many sought out degrees in the field of medicine. However, in order to get these desired degrees, they had no other choice but to travel out of state. When many returned home, settling in places such as North Dallas area, there, the greatest threats to public health stemmed from illnesses by inadequate city services, including low standards for food inspection and stagnant water on unpaved roads. Of the 1,157 whose remains were reinterred, sadly 52% of those buried in Freedman Cemetery before 1900 were under the age of 5. This specific display at the African American Museum is called Container of the Soul. Container of the Soul was made with artifacts and soil from the Freedmen's cemetery site and is a tribute to the thousands of people buried there. The placement of broken plates, earthenware, and seashells suggests ties to African burial traditions. Artifacts were selected because of their various historical periods. Though most of the artifacts found at Freeman's Cemetery were not able to be associated with specific graves, they are powerful metaphors for the lives of people who placed them there. Today, the cemetery remains as an important reminder and symbol of the significant contribution and impact made by African Americans toward the growth and development of Dallas.